and welcome to the Middle East Show. I'm very happy to be back after our holiday break, and I'd like to thank everybody who has continued to provide support to the People's Voice. We've been through quite a few trials and tribulations in the short time we've been on air, but I don't think anyone could deny the fact that we are airing stuff that simply would not be possible previous to the existence of the People's Voice. And I, for one, would like to thank David Icke and everyone who made this possible. And tonight, I can assure you the content of this program is something that you will never see anything even remotely close to it on the mainstream media. In fact, many, even in the alternative media, won't have the kind of integrity or courage to actually talk about these things. But we're going to talk about them tonight. And actually, our guest, who should have been in studio with us, is a man named Christopher Bolin. Now, Christopher Bolin is somebody who will be well known to anybody who's serious about 9/11 truth. Christopher Bolin has been speaking the truth about 9/11 for many years, and ultimately he fled the United States because of the kind of harassment and intimidation he was suffering at the hands of the U.S. government. Of course, there's no surprise there. The UK government, I'd like to thank them for not allowing Christopher in, because all this does is reinforce the fact that the powers that be, for all their power, for the governments they own, for the mainstream media they control, for all of the money they have at their disposal, all of the resources they have, they're frightened to death of people who don't have any kind of fear of any kind of oppression being put on them, any kind of fear at all on the capacity to speak the truth. Getting people like that together is the most frightening thing of all for the powers that be. So thank you to the UK government for only reinforcing that fact. And ultimately, you will not stop people like myself, Christopher Bolin, and so many others out there who are going to continue to reveal the criminality of your existence. Now, before we get into 9/11, I just want to explain that this was meant to be the first show, and I actually recorded the portion that you'll see soon enough a few weeks ago, but for various reasons we didn't air it. I wanted this to be the first show because no event has affected the Middle East and in fact the world more than 9/11, and we still have yet to really understand the full gravity of what happened that day, and more importantly, who is responsible. And trust me, we're going to discuss that in detail tonight. But before we do that, we're going to continue our Life in Gaza series. This is our third program in 24 of 20 families that we met in Gaza, heartbreaking stories. And this one is about a young boy named Tariq and the Abu Ashia family. So without further ado, let us please enjoy the story of the Abu Ashia family.
This was Tariq in Shartek, a refugee camp here in Gaza. This is more of a story of two things: the inability to travel and also the money. No jobs, no ability to make money. How are you going to pay for surgery for your son? Very sad. You know, like every kid, he wants to play, he wants to be accepted, and he's got this missing eye. And well, if the economic situation were to change, if freedom of movement were to change, this is another problem that could be, to the greatest extent, solved. But for now, this problem shall remain.
Yeah, she have 5 kids with Tariq. كيف حالك يا طارق؟ شو أخبارك؟ تروح على المدرسة؟ تروح على المدرسة؟ شاطر؟ احكي. تحب المدرسة؟ He's going to school and he likes the school so much. قديش عمرك يا طارق؟ 12. 13? Yeah, 13 years old. صف الإيش؟ 6th grade. بس إحنا بدنا نحكي معكم بخصوص حالة طارق، إيش اللي صار معاه؟ هل هو انولد هيك؟ هل هو صار في معاه مشكلة إشي؟ إيش مراحل العلاج؟ كل إشي يعني قصة طارق. In fact, it's a very complicated story. It began 10 years ago when he was 3 years old. He was standing, and then his mother witnessed that there's glowing in his eye. So she didn't care the first time, but then she saw that it is getting bigger and his eye is glowing more and more. So she took him to a hospital. The doctors say that he can't see in that eye. He just have one eye. So she took him to another doctor. He said this eye have cancer. And they told her in the hospital that they can't afford to make the surgery for her kid here in Gaza. So they sent her to Egypt, and she made the surgery in Egypt, and they took off his eye. And then after that, for like 6 years, have been treatments, trying to fix his eye, trying to put him another eye, trying just to provide him to see in other way, but nothing happened. From like the last 10 years she have been trying to do this, but there's no hope for her kid. طيب احكي لي حاليا اليوم هذا هل في علاج لطارق؟ What's happened now for this kid is that after they removed the eye, the cancer came back to him, and the cells of his eye started to die. So they made him another surgery to remove the cells, but it affected the other eye. So before like 2 months, they made him another surgery for his another eye, that the one that he can't see in it. Now they are saying in Gaza that there is no treatment for his situation, for Tariq's situation, but other people in Egypt and other countries tell that there is a solution for this problem, but she's saying that she can't afford, or so she don't know how to get out of Gaza. She don't have money, as you say, her home. She don't have enough money to support the travel of her son and her to go outside to find the solution or to do another surgery to provide him an eye. So that's what's happening.
So if there was a surgery, he could have a surgery in Egypt.
Yeah, he could. Yeah.
That would save the other eye and.
Yeah, he could save the eye that he can't see. He can't see, you know, like 90% in it, and to provide him a new eye.
Right.
Yeah, if she went to Egypt, but she's saying that she can't afford to do that. She's saying that kids in the schools and the streets, when he go to school, when he play with him in the streets, they told him, hey you, kid with one eye, hey you know, names and things like that to humiliate him, but he this thing affects his emotions and be sad and get back home crying and.
يعني لدرجة كان هو طفل أصغر من هيك يجيب اللعب ويعين عين اللعبة.
She's saying that when he was a kid, when his family used to give him toys, he removed one eye of the toy, so he feel he's equal with the toy. Before, like 4 or 5 years before the siege, there was a doctor, a foreign doctor, her name is Victoria, and she was taking care of Tariq, and she said that it is available to give him a new eye to see in it, but now she didn't come back from 4 years, and they don't know what the solution, and they are saying that the problem here is not to provide the money now. The problem is to get him out, because there is no treatment in Gaza. It is not about getting the money now. No, it is about getting him out of Gaza to Egypt, to other countries that could have a solution for him.
So the money is there, or the treatment could be.
No,
given?
they don't have money, but even if
they have
like they have it, they don't have the treatment here in Gaza. So the problem is to go out of Gaza.
When I took on this show, I knew that certain issues needed to be discussed right up front. And top of the list was 9/11, because no event has affected our world, especially the Middle East, more than 9/11. But all the major players in this event have received obvious cover from the governments, academics, and of course, the mainstream media. Aside from the sycophants protecting their masters, there is a much more insidious enemy of truth known as political correctness. I will not bow to such manipulations. Political correctness is a trap, functioning as a tool to prevent honest dialogue. It fosters, if not compels, self-censorship. It is a blatant form of thought control. So when I use the word Jew instead of Zionist, for example, I do so because it is the most accurate word to describe those whose primary allegiance is to the Jewish state of Israel. To use the word Zionist, as the thought police would have of me, would deny the fact that Israel is the Jewish state, not the Zionist state. Take the Christian Zionists, which are some of Israel's staunchest supporters. They're not granted the same right of settlement as their Jewish counterparts. Why? Well, because they're Zionists, but they are not Jewish. In the end, nobody is better placed to stop the criminality of the Jewish state than Jews themselves.
Go back to where you came from. You know where you came from?
For the speedy and peaceful dismantlement of the state of Israel. Then we can once again coexist as we have for hundreds of years. We have older rabbis who will testify lived in the old state of Jerusalem. In the old state, in the old city of Jerusalem. In the old city, they lived door by door. This rabbi lived in the old city of Jerusalem. Before 1948, he'll tell you how he lived, coexisted with all the Arab neighbors, how they babysat each other's children when they went to Yom Kippur, when the women went to Yom Kippur on the fast day, the Muslim neighbors babysat the children, the most precious objects they gave to them to protect.
Whether we like it or not, taking responsibility for the actions of our governments that operate in our name, that receive our complicity and our support, is essential to solving the problems we face. Blame shifting, on the other hand, is tantamount to voluntary maintenance of the tyranny. As for my motivations, I consider every single human being to be a brother or sister in one human family. And I want what is best for every member of my family. And I mean every member. But patronizing talk and false sensitivity helps nobody. Let there be no mistake. My greatest scorn is reserved for my birth nation of the United States, that is without doubt the greatest terrorist entity of the 20th and 21st centuries, regardless of the fact that it has been hijacked by traitors and foreign agents. So if the citizens of the Jewish state and the United States want to avoid the virtually inevitable retribution coming their way, it will be by changing their disastrous course without delay. In this sense, I am all too ironically a friend to the Jewish state and the American people, because both must face their criminal nature while they still have a chance. And to make this point that much clearer, if the situation were reversed and the Jewish people were being broadly blamed for the crimes of 9/11 when clearly they were patsies, I would be the first to stand up in their defense. Let me also extend an open invitation to Israeli, British, and American government representatives so as to challenge me on any point I make in this program or future programs, with a special invitation to Israeli spokesperson Mark Regev, who I will devote an entire program to one-on-one debate if he has the courage to take me up on it. If, however, these governments and their trolls simply choose to sling mud, you can rest assured it is because they are cowardly propagandists who could never back up their insultingly false incantations outside of the cozy confines of the whorehouses they frequent, otherwise known as the mass media. Before we explore the truth regarding 9/11, I must thank Christopher Bolin, Mark Glenn, Jonathan Azazia, Mark Dankoff, and Xander Z. Fereza for reviewing the content of this program. They have provided invaluable input. Now, the first thing to discuss about 9/11 is the fact that this event is quite possibly the greatest mind control event in human history. Certain aspects of it are so stark, so profound, that within this historic event can be seen a tremendous gift. But firstly, let me acknowledge the obvious. While my birth nation of America has meted out more violence in the 20th and 21st century than any other entity, it does not change the fact that the events of 9/11 are a great tragedy, not only for what happened on the day, but also for the far, far greater suffering and death that has resulted from it. Having said that, The gift lies in 9/11 serving as a litmus test for humanity. Indeed, I will make the case that we have reached a flashpoint in human history that will decide the fate of all life on planet Earth, because in the nuclear age, we simply cannot sustain the collective insanity of our current path. We have come this close to nuclear annihilation many times over, and facing the truth about 9/11 can be the beginning of the end of that insanity. The good news is that poll after poll makes very clear that more and more people do not trust the official account of 9/11. Around the world, it is safe to say that the majority of people do not accept the official version of the event. In America itself, roughly half doubt or disbelieve the official version altogether. And herein lies the heart of the gift. Despite all of the mass media deception, people are seeing straight through the lies and regaining the capacity to think and process information intelligently. This is absolutely critical in the process of liberating humanity from the bondage and ignorance and division. I have often used a metaphor to describe the current state of human existence, and it goes like this. Human society has created and ultimately consented to the institutions of power that oppress us, to such a degree that we the people have constructed a massive prison that every man, woman, and child, for the most part, have voluntarily entered. We have then closed the prison door behind us, taken the key within our collective hands, and locked the prison door. As if this wasn't bad enough, incredibly, we have then handed the key to the prison door to a group of psychopathic tyrants who have all too wisely remained outside of the prison. Subsequently, we continue to beg these tyrants for the crumbs while we continue to remain locked in a prison of our own making. Now, the prison is a metaphor for our current financial system, a financial system utilized by the tyrants to control virtually every aspect of human existence. And yet, and please listen to what I am saying here, the tyrants are powerless without our consent. And while we have collectively entered this prison, we can tear down the prison walls of financial enslavement in an instant. No matter what our religion, non-religion, what color we are, what country we come from, what group we relate to, or what philosophy we subscribe to, we, the masses, have the same cause. We want the same things. We want to live a dignified life. We want a just and peaceful world. The powers that be know this very well, and that is why they must continuously divide us and rule us. The key to the maintenance of their tyranny is hoodwinking us into fighting each other for the crumbs from their lavish tables. And believe me, the powers that be revel in the madness that is our division and ultimately self-imposed enslavement. They are laughing at us. They mock us. But it doesn't have to be this way. Do you want a better world, a sane, just, and peaceful world? Well, so do I. In fact, I demand such a world because I refuse to accept the unacceptable. And while I hold the tyrants responsible for ungodly amounts of suffering and injustice and death, I cannot ignore the fact that they could not possibly have achieved this without the massive compliance from the masses, from us. Which brings us back to an uncomfortable truth, which is that we are guilty to one degree or another. I want to issue a huge apology to a group to which I am not a member. Because as I will lay out very clearly, if there is one group that cannot be held responsible for the 9/11 event, it is the very group blamed for this crime. And that would be the Muslims around the world. So let me say with resounding clarity on behalf of all sane, thinking people, we are deeply sorry that Muslims have been falsely accused of the events of 9/11 and that subsequently, countless Muslim lands and people have endured the farcical war on terror. We apologize for the invasions, occupations, drone strikes, torture, Guantanamo, for all of the maiming and the death that has rained down on you. Let it be understood from this day forward, from this non-Muslim, that we know the 9/11 false flag was intentionally, falsely blamed on you, so as to cultivate a clash of civilizations. We reject the war on terror in total and shall identify those responsible come hell or high water. When we return, we shall discuss the absurdity of the official version of 9/11 and, more importantly, whose fingerprints are left all over this event. The official version of 9/11. Here's a brief description of the official version. 19 hijackers, mostly of Saudi origin, were headed by a lead hijacker named Mohammed Atta. The hijackers received flight school training for small, single and twin-engine airplanes at various flight schools in the United States. These hijackers were directed by al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, who lived in caves in Afghanistan while requiring dialysis to survive. Together, they managed to outwit the entire defense systems of America, despite the fact that in 2001 the United States invested more money and resources in defense than just about every other nation on the planet combined. We were told that the breathtakingly vast defense and intelligence apparatus of America had not contemplated the possibility of airplanes being used to fly into buildings. On 9/11, there was a U.S. military defense drill codenamed Vigilant Guardian that simulated the exact events of 9/11. As a result of this drill, there was confusion about whether there was a real or simulated hijacking, and thus 19 individuals managed to allegedly hijack 4 planes and freely roam American airspace without any challenge from U.S. interceptor fighter jets. The official version tells us the hijackers successfully hit 3 out of 4 targets on 9/11, with one airplane being brought down by heroic passengers who shouted, "Let's roll," before overwhelming the box cutter-armed Muslim fanatic terrorists. The other planes, however, hit the Twin Towers and allegedly the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. as well, which happens to be the most heavily guarded airspace on planet Earth. While none of the virtually indestructible black boxes of any of the 4 airplanes were ever proven to be recovered, including that of Flight 93, which apparently managed an intact nosedive into a field in Pennsylvania, which occurred at such a high rate of speed that none of the actual plane, fuselage, jet engine, seats, or bodies was ever recovered. However, officials did recover 2 of the hijackers' passports and a bandana, as well as another alleged hijacker's passport from Flight 11, which slammed into the North Tower, causing a massive fireball. Although just 2 of the buildings were hit by planes in New York City, 3 buildings were completely destroyed, while 7 buildings were either partially or fully destroyed. The Twin Towers almost entirely turned to dust, while Building 7 collapsed in a process that resembled a controlled demolition, with each of the 3 buildings falling at free-fall speed. We are told that the destruction of the Twin Towers was caused by the weakening of the steel support columns from jet fuel fires, and that Building 7 collapsed uniformly in a free fall due to a standard office fire. This is the first and only time in history that has occurred to such buildings, steel support, steel frame buildings. We are also told that the Pentagon was hit by an airplane whose pilot executed a 270-degree banking right turn as it descended 8,000 feet, all the while managing to avoid detection of upwards to 85 surveillance cameras covering its flight path as it apparently flew directly into the Pentagon. Footage from the 85-plus surveillance cameras was confiscated by the FBI, but they assure us it was just as described. The commission created to carry out the official investigation required 442 days to be formed by a foot-dragging Bush administration. No less than Henry Kissinger was appointed to lead the investigation, and the total budget allocated to investigate the biggest crime in the history of America was a staggeringly minuscule $14 million. By comparison, the U.S. government budgeted $160 million, when adjusted for inflation, to investigate the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty. Conspiracy theories, conspiracy theories, conspiracy theories.
The official version of 9/11 is a terribly bad B-movie. It is a massive insult to our intelligence and all too significantly reveals the depth of mind control that many in our world are subject to. All too ironically, those of us who are not so brain dead as to believe the official version are called conspiracy theorists, despite the obvious fact that the official version of 9/11 is in fact, you guessed it, a conspiracy. It just so happens to be the most ridiculous conspiracy of them all. And let us not forget these important facts. Osama bin Laden himself denied any involvement in 9/11. And before you have that knee-jerk reaction of saying he confessed to it on video, hold that thought. With regard to America's supposed need to invade Afghanistan in pursuit of bin Laden, the Taliban stated on record that they would extradite him if only the United States would adhere to this paltry little thing called due process of law, which also involves another little thing called evidence. As it turns out, the U.S. decided in favor of invading and occupying two nations and turning them back to the Stone Age. As far as the evidence is concerned, it's a sort of don't worry about it kind of thing. So bin Laden was never actually charged with any crime regarding 9/11, with the FBI stating in 2006 that there was, quote, no hard evidence linking bin Laden to 9/11. Going back to the supposed bin Laden video confession, if the FBI does not believe it, why do you? As for the supposed 19 hijackers, there is no video evidence of any of the hijackers boarding the planes, from airports controlled by Israeli security no less. Several items have been used as evidence to implicate these patsies, but these are ridiculous. As already mentioned, 3 passports belonging to alleged hijackers were supposedly recovered. In the case of Satam al-Sakami's passport, it is said to have survived the plane crash's explosive fireball in the North Tower, falling hundreds of feet to the ground and then randomly picked up by a passerby who delivered it to the New York Police Department. In pristine condition, no less, with no burns, tears, or rips, with the picture and name perfectly visible. Once again, no bodies or plane wreckage was recovered from the alleged Flight 93 crash site in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, supposedly because the plane crashed at such an incredible rate of speed that apparently everything vaporized. Nonetheless, 2 passports, a martyrdom note, and a red bandana that is said to have been worn by one of the hijackers was remarkably recovered.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office, where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly, answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her, and her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet, employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about
his head could be seen to move violently forward.
And
they took the babies out of incubators.
And
mobile production facilities.
And
the rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, MSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. Because ignorance is strength.
There is one thing that defines everyone over the course of these early years of this new century. That thing is the 9/11 attack. Everyone in government in every field of endeavor, the world over, is defined by their position on this event. It is not necessary to know the truth. It is only necessary to know the extent of the lies in order to define any leader in any position anywhere in the world. By what they have said and by what they have not said, one can accurately judge who is an enemy of the peoples of the world. One can accurately determine who is a tool of the psychopaths or one of them. Think about what you allow yourself to know. Think about what you pass by, ignore, deny, and defend that defines you. It defines the degree of your personal courage, your relationship to the truth, your values, your principles, and what you will pass on to your children and everyone you meet. It tells you, in that place where your conscience must once have lived, whether you are a hypocrite and a fool, or whether something greater still lives within you. 19 men passed through airport security. 11 of them are stopped and questioned, but then allowed to board. Several large passenger planes wind up hijacked and flown at high speed into enormous buildings. None of these men had shown previous capacity to accomplish this feat. These men were armed with box cutters. No jet fighters were scrambled to intercept these planes, although the authorities in charge of such actions knew immediately what was happening. Airport traffic controllers were ordered to destroy all recorded evidence of the event. Some of them physically broke the CDs and scattered the pieces into different trash containers at the airports. Within hours, 3 of the biggest buildings in the city, buildings designed to absorb the impact of the very planes which hit them, all crumbled into their own footprints at the speed of free fall. It was said that the fire, which burned below the melting point of steel, caused this to happen. No fire in history had previously accomplished such a thing, not once. Previous fires had burned hotter and longer, yet no building fell. Now, 3 have fallen in one day. Months later, the wreckage burned white hot beneath the surface, and clear cuts and support beams were photographed. A passport from one of the hijackers appears on a city street, undamaged. Cars are discovered at airports with flight training videos and Qurans. Apparently the men, who were deeply religious enough to give their lives to attack these buildings, thought nothing of leaving their sacred texts behind. Some weeks later, 7 of the alleged hijackers are found to be alive in their native countries. Some days earlier, some of these men were observed drinking and having lap dances in a Florida bar. This sort of behavior is not normal for such men as these. Around the same time, the ringleader of these men and some associates were observed by the FBI boarding a gambling boat belonging to Jack Abramoff. These men were tracked to Las Vegas and watched by the FBI, yet they passed through the airport security checkpoints. Even though 11 of them were stopped and questioned, they still boarded. On the day of the event, several men were observed videotaping the attack as it happened. They were seen to be dancing and celebrating as well. The police stopped and arrested them. They were found to be Mossad agents. Sometime later, they were quietly released and returned to their home country with no reasons given. The men videotaping and celebrating had to have known about the attack in advance in order to have been in a position to film it. Members of the bin Laden family, the man accused of masterminding the attack, were immediately flown out of the country. Bin Laden denied any connection to this attack. Direct evidence of this exists, and no evidence of his admitting his involvement exists. All of this is fabrication and hearsay. No one can present such information other than one fabricated video that was proven false by the world's leading forensic experts in Switzerland. Many insist it is true, but no one has such evidence. Go look. Show it to me. As a result of this event, major wars have been launched. Over 1 million people have died, with nearly another 5 million displaced. An investigation was launched into the event against the wishes of the president and vice president, and rubber-stamped with pre-dawn conclusions, even though the evidence did not support these conclusions. The wreckage was gathered together and shipped overseas. No one was allowed to investigate it. In every event in New York City, in a Pennsylvania field, at the Pentagon, all of the evidence is contradictory. The amount of evidence on every level that directly refutes what we have been told fills thousands of pages. Meanwhile, the administration and the Congress belligerently oppose any inquiry into the matter. People in government who have questioned the official story have been fired from their jobs or driven from office by the very party they are a member of. University professors are fired for discussing it. Major websites composed of experts in their fields are ignored and even censured. Casual investigation of who benefited and who engineered actions of global impact based on official 911 findings all lead to the same parties. It is incontrovertibly true that one organization, PNAC, called for an attack on American soil in order to facilitate what followed. Members of this organization held key positions in and around the present administration. Therefore, here is what you must know, given that the official story is patently absurd. Anyone I mean anyone who promotes the official story, who accepts the official story, who oppresses those who doubt the official story, who does not question the official story, is involved or too stupid to pat their head and chew gum at the same time. Any presidential candidate who does not dispute the official story is a traitor to their nation and a tool of those who accomplished this attack. It all comes down to 911. Everything that has happened based on a lie. Everyone in government, in the media, in entertainment, in organized religion, in the public eye, and in the public who accepts and promotes the official story is either a traitor or a tool. Everyone who does not stand forth and speak truth to power is a coward, a liar, and complicit in mass murder. Everyone, everywhere can be measured according to this litmus test.
So now, let us extract ourselves from the collective insanity required to even entertain the official version of 9/11. Instead, let us take a look at reality and the evidence around 9/11 that is part of the public record. As you will see, this evidence indicts certain players who were indeed motivated by a religious fanaticism, but they are not Muslims. First off, let us acknowledge the obvious. The U.S. government has done everything in its power to pervert the course of justice, and that in itself is a major crime, given the mass murder they continue to cover up. So this fact alone indicts the U.S. government. Aside from that, the odds of a drill simulating the exact events of the actual reality occurring as pure coincidence is like a fairy story. With no disrespect to those who believe in fairies, because I myself accept the existence of fairies as a far more likely possibility than the myriad of coincidences that officially occurred regarding 9/11. Speaking of coincidences, imagine that you are a Jewish billionaire businessman named Larry Silverstein, and that you have set your sights on acquiring some of the most expensive real estate in the world, specifically the World Trade Center complex with its crown jewels known as the Twin Towers. However, there's a bit of a problem. The Twin Towers were full of cancer-causing asbestos, and the cost estimates for removal of the asbestos range from the low billions to the tens of billions. Far, far more than the outdated, half-empty Twin Towers were worth. Indeed, the Twin Towers were such a liability that the Port Authority of New York had been desperately seeking a way to demolish them since 1990. But the cost of doing so prevented them from doing this because the toxic asbestos was extremely difficult and dangerous to remove. On May 14th, 2001, 4 months before 9/11, the Port Authority lost a lawsuit that meant it was on the hook to remove that asbestos. The head of the Port Authority was Louis Eisenberg, and he personally oversaw the privatization that led to Larry Silverstein and Frank Lowy obtaining the 99-year lease for the towers on July 24th, 2001, just 6 weeks before 9/11. But Silverstein demanded and got $3.5 billion worth of insurance payable in cash if the towers were destroyed. Now, the fact that Silverstein was close friends with Benjamin Netanyahu, or that he skipped his daily breakfast at the Windows on the World restaurant located on the 107th floor of the North Tower on 9/11, or that his son and daughter also happened to be unexpectedly absent on 9/11, is all just amazing good fortune, we are told.
In the days before, I think, the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers fell, I understand you had daily breakfast meetings with people, I think, in the Windows of the World, the famous restaurant, the World Trade Center.
That's correct.
But you weren't there for breakfast on the day of September 11th. Why was that?
That morning, my wife had made an appointment for me at the dermatologist, who I have to visit with regularity, right? And as I'm dressing to go to the dermatologist that morning, I looked at my wife and said, you know, I've got so much to do downtown. Cancel the dermatologist. I've got to go downtown. She got upset. She said, you can't cancel. You've got to go.
Was that Larry Silverstein's luck?
It was clearly my luck. It was clearly my luck.
Larry's business partner is quite a character himself. Jewish billionaire Frank Lowy, who leased the shopping concourse area called the Mall at the World Trade Center, made up of approximately 427,000 square feet of retail floor space. Lowy is a Hungarian Jew born in Czechoslovakia with Israeli citizenship. In 1946, he made his way to Palestine, then under the British Mandate, where he joined the Jewish terrorist group known as Haganah. From there, he joined the notorious Golani Brigade and partook in the ethnic cleansing of Al-Jalil. Lowy is personal friends with the entire Likud leadership, Netanyahu, Sharon, etc. He lives in Israel part of the year and has established numerous think tanks to promote Israeli geopolitical interests. So Silverstein's and Lowy's investment would have to be considered one of the worst investments in the history of our world, were it not for the little coincidence of 2 planes bringing down 7 buildings within 6 weeks of leasing the property and them taking out a multi-billion-dollar insurance policy, which resulted in Silverstein and Lowy receiving an insurance payoff of over $5 billion. Not bad at all. When Silverstein was asked why he purchased the Twin Towers lease, he simply said, quote, "I felt a compelling urge to own them." Let us imagine that Lucky Larry was instead named Mohammed, and he was a Muslim instead of a Jew. And Mohammed bought this dubious asbestos-ridden property, proceeded to more than double the insurance policy. Then, as the world watches while his buildings disintegrate 6 weeks later, Mohammed even directs that one building be, quote, pulled. And subsequently, good old Mohammed gets a tidy $5 billion profit.
This one's for Larry Silverstein. Last time we talked, sir, I asked you if you could address some of the 9/11 conspiracy theories that you are accused of. Sadly, your response has actually invited more of them. I mean, for the record, everybody knows your infamous comments on PBS where you said pull Building 7 on 5/25 on the day of 9/11.
They were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Your official response was that it was the firefighters. My question is, it was pretty clear that you meant the building, and if it was the firefighters, they already are outside the building by 12 because the water lines were broken.
Ask the question.
And the fire chief that you said you spoke to, Fire Chief Nagro, denies talking to you on that day of 9/11. Can you answer those questions and address the theories against you?
I suggest to everybody's consideration that we all look at the thousands of pages of testimony that have been rendered in the many years since 9/11, and let's use today's session for something that's...
Are you aware of testimony of bombs in the building before the building collapsed, sir? Are you aware of that testimony? Sir, there's testimony by Barry Jennings. Sir, you don't have to touch me. Listen, I'll walk away. All I'm asking is a question. I don't have to be kicked out. It's a legitimate question. You don't have to put your hands on me. But all I'm saying is, no, I'm not. I'm here asking. The question was not answered. That's why I have a grievance. Larry Silverstein was told not to come into work. That's why him, his daughter, and his son never showed up to work on 9/11. He put an insurance policy on the buildings. Reporters, do your job. Please ask some questions.
It is like a tragic comedy that we as people have allowed ourselves to be conned into ignoring the mountains of evidence that indicts traitors within the U.S. government and military, as well as dual nationals, Jewish Israelis, who happen to have also advertised their desire for a, quote, new Pearl Harbor type event that would allow them to carry out a perpetual war policy for reasons of greed and power. Wrapped up in a blanket of patriotism, of course. Whether you knew any of this or not, it has been hidden in plain sight.
Who had the power to pull off 9/11 without a hitch? Who had the most pressing motive? Who had the money to pay for all of it? Who had control of the military in NORAD to force it to stand down while 4 passenger planes went to their designated targets? Who knew the intricacies of U.S. commercial flights to get around the FAA air traffic control? Who had the power, if needed, to operate planes by remote control? Who had control of the courts in the United States to make sure that no wrongful death claims were trial? Who had control of disposal so that all the steel girders of the Twin Towers were shipped to China before they could be chemically analyzed? Who had the power to control the NYPD and the NYFD? Who had the power to allow dozens of suspects to escape to foreign countries, especially Israeli suspects? Who had the technology to bring down steel-girded buildings built to withstand forces much greater than aberrant planes and nominal fires? Who had the advanced computer knowledge to coordinate the attacks? Who had the state-of-the-art knowledge about explosives and detonators? Who had control of the press and media to curtail investigations? Who is the most familiar with and has political control over the city, New York, at which the attacks took place? Who has a history of unprovoked attacks or even false flag operations, some of which have been directed at the United States? Who has a network of spies operating in the United States that could facilitate the attacks? Who has personnel in almost every sector of the American federal government to create a massive cover-up? And lastly, as any detective would ask, who benefits? Who benefits, cui bono, from the attacks? Israel had the motive, the power, the money, the influence, the technology, the terrorist history, and most of all, was the only one who benefited from 9/11. Benjamin Netanyahu, who admitted in an off-guard moment that, quote, we're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, and the American struggle in Iraq. These events swung American public opinion in our favor. The day after, Netanyahu said something even more incredible. In regard to the 9/11 attacks, he said, quote, it's very good.
Folks, we have only just begun to reveal the fingerprints of this crime scene. But the next question is, are we ready to face the truth? Well, I believe we are. So let us imagine a crime so audacious that it was practically advertised before it was even committed. In addition to the incredible act of false flag terrorism that is the 9/11 operation, I am talking about the supreme crime of aggression, defined by the International Criminal Court as the planning, preparation, initiation, or execution of an act using armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of another state. Well, that is precisely what these criminals in positions of public trust did. First they planned, then they boldly laid out those plans in two documents. The first one, written in 1996, was entitled Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. And it argued for regime change in Iraq based on the pretext that Saddam Hussein was a security threat developing weapons of mass destruction. Sound familiar? The second document, written in 2000, called for much, much more than regime change. That document was entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategies, Forces, and Resources for a New Century. This document laid out a plan that would require multiple wars of aggression and occupation so as to achieve a goal of full spectrum dominance. The name of the group proposing these criminal policies was the Project for a New American Century, or PNAC. And their membership happens to read like a who's who in Jewish, Israeli, American politics. To be fair, the Project for a New American Century did have one token Islamic figure, or, to use the terminology of the late, great Malcolm X, a lone house Muslim. Getting back to the plans of PNAC and the goal of full spectrum dominance, basically, this involves the American empire establishing global control of air, land, sea, and space, and cyberspace. In order to achieve this goal, a primary objective was to seize the world's largest energy reserves, specifically the oil and gas reserves of the former Soviet republics in the Caspian Basin, as well as the oil of Iraq, the former requiring the control of a pipeline route to deliver said oil and gas to international markets. Another objective was to establish permanent military bases in this strategic area so as to ensure rapid deployment to any trouble spots where the natives might just get a little bit restless. Now, the PNAC plan complemented another goal known as the Greater Israel Project. Going back to statements from the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, the so-called Promised Land extends from the Nile River of Egypt to the Euphrates in Iraq. In Oded Yanan's A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s, Israeli regional superiority was to be achieved through a process of reconfiguring the Middle East by the balkanization of the surrounding Arab states into smaller and weaker states divided along sectarian lines. Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia were all in the crosshairs, but Israeli strategists viewed Iraq as their biggest challenge of all. And thus Iraq was outlined as the centerpiece to the Balkanization of the Middle East. Iraq was to be divided into a Kurdish state, a Shiite Arab state, and a Sunni Arab state. The first step towards establishing this goal, however, was to instigate a war between Iraq and Iran, a war that would significantly weaken both states. So while Saddam Hussein served wonderfully as an attack dog against Iran, the moment he had fulfilled his utility, he became the butcher of Baghdad, and the Balkanization of Iraq merely required a pretext. And that brings us back to the PNAC lunatics and their full-spectrum dominance agenda that required multiple wars and the inevitable bloodbaths that would follow. The only problem from their perspective was that the American public could not possibly be told the truth of this plan because there was simply no way that they would support it. So how would PNAC achieve this goal? Well, they acknowledged in writing that only one thing could deliver them the means to achieve their psychopathic dream, and that was, quote, a new Pearl Harbor. Only such an event could whip the American public up into the fever pitch of vengeance that could serve as the pretext for multiple wars. And lo and behold, the gift of 9/11 was provided, and the farcical War on Terror was born. Muslims became the new boogeyman. The clash of civilizations as envisioned by Zionist ideologue Bernard Lewis was instigated, and the Middle East would soon be set alight. Understanding the motive, let us now look at the fingerprints. Perhaps you recall news reports on 9/11 purportedly showing Palestinians dancing with joy on the day. This could hardly have been any more insightful for an already thoroughly traumatized American public.
Atmosphere, the V sign for victory being displayed in East Jerusalem today among jubilant Palestinians that the United States had been subject to this attack. What are we to make of that, Jennifer? Are we to, Yasser Arafat may issue this condemnation. Look at this. We're seeing people applauding, clapping, smiling, happy to know that thousands of Americans have died in this sneak attack, and there you see a V for victory sign.
The United States, blamed by some Palestinians for its ongoing support, as it is seen, of Israel in this conflict, in this Middle Eastern conflict. However, while some Palestinians were taking to the streets in apparent celebration, one youth was quoted as saying, as he received sweets handed around in celebration, "This is a sweet from Osama bin Laden," he said.
There's just one serious problem with these reports. As the German newspaper Der Spiegel later reported, the cheering of the Palestinians was unrelated to the events of 9/11 and was apparently instigated by Reuters reporters who were bearing cakes and sweets.
What's tendered as news and even cultural norms is proffered in a tightly controlled venue, which George Orwell called the Ministry of Truth, which holds the means to mold the minds of the masses. And this power is in the hands of a few. Nah, they're not prostitutes, as Gerald Celente would have us believe. And they're not corporate elitists, as Alex Jones puts it. They're Jews. And I'm going to tell you just who. CBS is owned by Murray Rothstein. He changed his name to Sumner Redstone to pass himself off as a blue-blooded Gentile. NBC is owned by Brian Roberts, who with his sitcom, The New Normal, is corrupting the morals of our youth and annihilating the core of a stable, responsible society. ABC is owned by Sidney Bass, with Robert Iger as CEO, successor to Michael Eisner. CNN, along with Time and People magazine, all under the umbrella of Time Warner, is primarily owned by Israeli multimillionaire Aviv Novo, who hired a public relations company to shield him from public exposure. CNN's CEO is Jeff Zucker, former CEO of NBC. Fox News is owned by Rupert Murdoch, born to Jewish mother Elizabeth Green, making him by Talmudic law a Jew. In the print media, Murdoch also owns the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post. Newsweek is owned by Jane Harmon and Barry Diller. Harmon's Newsweek is pushing that Jewish orchestrated red line. over which even more American Gentile soldiers will spill their blood for the Jews in Syria and Iran. The Washington Post is owned by the Meyer-Graham family, with Donald Graham as chairman, Dave Goldberg is CEO, and Barry Diller is senior executive. And the New York Times, America's foremost print media, is owned by the Sulzberger family, with Arthur Sulzberger Jr. as chairman of the board. Even now, the Times is repeating the weapons of mass destruction lie to get us into yet another war for the Jews in Syria. You see, the only news you're going to get is what the Jews deem fit to print.
These pictures and videos of dancing, celebrating Palestinians were broadcast around the world, putting the already thoroughly victimized Palestinian people at even greater risk of brutal and consistent Israeli violence. On 9/11, there were indeed 5 dancing celebrating Middle Easterners. The only problem was that they were Jewish Israelis. But you simply would never know this if you gathered your so-called news from exclusively mainstream media. Nonetheless, 5 dancing Israelis were positioned at a prime vantage point to film the planes as they crashed into the Twin Towers. And yes, the Israelis were in place with camera directed at the towers before the first plane hit. A woman observing them was deeply troubled by their obvious joy, literally dancing and high-fiving each other as the carnage of the day was playing out. She was so disturbed that she wrote down their license plate number and reported them to the police, who later arrested the individuals, 2 of whom being known Mossad agents.
I grabbed my binoculars and I could see the towers from my window. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
We had received an all-points bulletin, and I just happened to see the van and, hollered over to my lieutenant. I think that could be the van. We checked it out, and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. I'm
going to ask this question more than once. What if the dancing, celebrating people were in fact Palestinian, Arab, or Muslim? Would there have been even one American of age who would not know about this? At this point, we need to talk about Mossad. Mossad is the Israeli equivalent of America's CIA or the UK's MI6. Mossad, like their American and British counterparts, are agents of state-sponsored terrorism whose business involves political assassinations, car bombing, spying, as well as a host of other illegal and immoral activities. Importantly, the Mossad's motto just about says it all. By way of deception, thou shalt do war. Keep that motto in mind when I tell you that a month before 9/11, the Mossad sent a general warning to the CIA alleging that as many as 200 terrorists were present on American soil and were preparing a major operation. The Mossad linked the plot to Osama bin Laden and told their CIA counterparts that there were, quote, strong grounds to suspect Iraqi involvement. On the evening of 9/11, 2 mysterious calls were placed to the New York City Police Department in which the callers claimed to have witnessed a group of Palestinians and Arabs constructing a bomb in a van that was headed towards Holland Tunnel. The police apprehended the suspects, and the truck bomb story was independently reported by CNN, Fox News, ABC News, CBS News, and other major media outlets.
And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives has anything to do with other events of the day is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge. But they arrested the 2 suspects and they're questioning them as we speak.
Reports we're getting now, 2 or 3 men arrested on the New Jersey Parkway. Deborah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. That is the information that I'm getting from two sources, that there was a van either on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway, and that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van.
Perhaps you noticed that the ethnicity of the suspects arrested while attempting to detonate a massive bomb in New York City on 9/11 was not mentioned by any of the mainstream media. So I posed the question, if they were Palestinians, Arabs, or Muslims, do you think this detail might have been reported? Furthermore, what do you think the chances are that you would be unaware of this story if the culprits were in fact Palestinians, Arabs, or Muslims? Well, they weren't. They were Jewish Israelis, and this is a classic example of a false flag operation to which Israel has a long history. Probably the most unusual, if not shocking, event of the day came in the form of another white van that was stopped by a New York Police Department on 9/11.
I got a message on that plane. It's a big truck with a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. All right, 10-4. I'll send the issue in the bomb squad there full with King. The 4? You got that last message? That's fine. With a mural painted, airplane diving into New York, blowing up. 2 men got out of the truck, ran away from it. We got those 2 under. That's good. You got those? Are you holding those 2 guys, Kay? We have them under. Let's get some units going there. Listen to that. Beat the shit out of them. All right, get in. See that? All right, listen, you need any further on those 2 guys over there? You all right over there, Kay? We have both suspects under, Kay. We have the suspects who drove in the van exploded. We have both of them under, Kay. Let's get some help over here. Now, I'm sending you here, shoot there. I just want to make sure you and your guys are all right over there, Kay. That's all. What's the location of that, Kay? Put them up. You know, we have both Trans driven that exploded. Resurrect.
Police recordings indicate that this van had a mural painted on the side that literally depicted a remote-controlled plane crashing into the World Trade Center and exploding. The van's occupants were arrested and were referred to as ethnic Middle Easterners in a U.S. government report. Of course, if they were Palestinian, Arabs, or Muslims, this incident would have been plastered all over the media as proof of an Arab-Islamic conspiracy behind 9/11. But few have ever heard of it, simply because it was another bungled false flag for which Israelis were ultimately responsible.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "We're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq," end quote.
In November 2001, Fox News aired an explosive 4-part series detailing a secretive investigation that was being conducted by U.S. authorities into Israeli espionage in the United States. The report revealed that around 200 Israeli spies had been arrested by American authorities, the largest spy ring to be uncovered in U.S. history. 140 of these Israelis had been taken into custody just prior to 9/11, and the remaining 60 had been apprehended shortly thereafter in connection with the ongoing investigation into the attacks. Many of the Israeli spies belonged to the electronic surveillance and explosive ordnance units in the Israeli military. Fortunately for the 200 Israeli spies, they had friends in very high places. Michael Chertoff is a Jewish Israeli dual national who, as Assistant Attorney General, oversaw the non-investigation of 9/11, in which the crucial evidence was all confiscated and destroyed before it could be examined. Chertoff's mother also happened to be a Mossad operative. Chertoff, along with other dual citizens in the U.S. government, not only spearheaded the cover-up, he orchestrated the release of over 200 Israeli suspects, including the 5 dancing Israelis, those caught with their explosives in their van, as well as those caught with the van depicting a plane crashing into the Twin Towers. Many of these Israeli suspects failed multiple polygraph tests while in custody as well, but you probably have never heard of any of them. And they were all quietly deported to Israel. Case closed. And then there is Rabbi Dov Zakheim, another Israel First champion. In 2001, Zakheim was CEO of SPC International, part of the System Planning Corporation, a defense contractor primarily investing in electronic warfare technologies, including remote-controlled aircraft systems, and the notorious flight termination system, FTS technology, that could hijack even a hijacked plane and land or crash it wherever. In addition, he was appointed as the Pentagon Comptroller in May 2001. During the same period, Donald Rumsfeld announced that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion.
Okay, Donald, did you ever find that $2.3 trillion that you talked about the day before 9/11? Did you ever find it?
It was always there, and what the problem was tracking it through the system. So when I arrived in the Pentagon and they told me that they can't track $2.3 billion that had been accumulated over the period before I got there, it turns out that there was not a legal problem or a loss. It was a matter of the complexity of the systems and tracking it all the way through.
Mr. Secretary,
we got to go.
I'm sorry, guys, sorry.
Zakheim is also a co-author of the Project for a New American Century's position paper, Rebuilding America's Defenses, making him intimately aware of the need for a, quote, new Pearl Harbor. Let us also recall that Flight 175, which allegedly hit the South Tower, and Flight 11, which allegedly hit the North Tower, were Boeing 767s because Rabbi Zakheim was in charge of a company that had access to Boeing 767s and the technology to retrofit them with remote control piloting systems. When we look at the alleged Flight 175 as pictured on the news media and official reports, it appears to be a retrofitted Boeing 767 that Zakheim's company had access to, and it furthermore appears to have a flight termination system attached, which might be a better explanation for the expert piloting of aircraft on 9/11.
Second plane was an unmarked silver fuselage.
Mark, were you close enough to be able to see any markings on the airplane?
It definitely did not look like a commercial plane. I didn't see any windows on the sides.
And it didn't look like a commercial jet.
It was a military plane.
Could be a drone aircraft. That's an aircraft that's guided electronically to its target without having a pilot.
The plane circle around and actually come on to the opposite side of the building and smash into the Trade Center. It was great, to be honest with you.
Rabbi Zakheim had access to the money, technology, and planes that were capable of carrying out 9/11, but don't worry, Philip Zelikow oversaw the official 9/11 investigation, and he has assured us that no Israelis were involved. So who is Philip Zelikow? He also happens to be a Jewish Israel First champion who Bush and Cheney selected to write the 9/11 Commission report. A year before that selection, Zelikow said the following: "I'll tell you what I think. The real threat is, and actually has been since 1990, it's the threat against Israel." But it gets better. Good old Phil describes himself as an expert in the, quote, creation and maintenance of public myths. He further defines public myth as a public presumption about history that may or may not be true, but which, nevertheless, exerts a powerful influence on the public opinion, and through that influence affects history. It is time to confront another social taboo, and that would be the obvious motive that an overwhelmingly Jewish-owned mainstream media has in showing Israel in a positive light, while Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims are demonized incessantly, especially since 9/11. It is undeniably politically incorrect to say this, but I will say it anyway. The mainstream media is massively, disproportionately Jewish-owned, and the fact that people are afraid to admit this truth and discuss this blatantly favorable bias towards Israel is very revealing indeed. I think a Jewish correspondent for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz said it best, quote, The Jews do control the American media. This is very clear, and claiming otherwise is an insult to common knowledge. But me stating this relevant and important fact will not stop the inevitable attacks, and therein lies the effectiveness of stifling debate or critical investigations. Only those of us who do not fear loss of income, freedom, or even our lives are willing to say such things. But it is not the personal risks that matter. My point here is to make clear that there is a serious conflict of interest when it comes to the reporting of 9/11 and so many other issues for that matter. But with regard to 9/11, there is stunningly incriminating Jewish Zionist fingerprints all over the event. But I shall repeat, there is no possible way that Israel alone could have carried out the 9/11 operation. So let me be emphatically clear on this. There are many American traitors, some Jewish, many not, who swore to uphold the U.S. Constitution and yet committed high treason on 9/11. 9/11 was undoubtedly a joint false flag operation between the governments of Israel and the United States. If we had more time, I would also discuss the Israeli links to the anthrax mailings, Sybil Emmons, Colleen Rowley, Abel Danger, Mossad Front Company Urban Moving Systems, the National Transportation Safety Board acknowledging that there is no evidence of wreckage at Ground Zero from American Airlines Flight 11 or United Airlines Flight 175, PTEX Enterprise Software and its links to Mossad, the corporation known as MITRE, which played a central role in subverting air traffic control networks on 9/11, the Israeli-owned Odigo instant messaging service that provided a warning to Jewish Israelis of the 9/11 events 2 hours before they occurred, Jewish judges like Alvin Hellerstein and Sheila Birnbaum who pressured the 9/11 victims' families into silence, ICTS, an Israeli company that provided airport security for every airport from which the allegedly hijacked planes operated, the killing of American patriot John O'Neill at the hands of Jerome Hauer, the 9/11 Commission report failing to mention Building 7, the unprecedented put options predicting the fall of American and United Airlines stock, the overwhelming evidence that the Patriot Act was written years before 9/11, and so many other truths/coincidences that the mere thought of them makes my head spin. Let this be understood. The matrix of power in our world is headed by the financial system. Those who control the issuance of money via the biggest banks are in fact the rulers of the earth, but only because we have allowed traitors in our governments to give them that power on our behalf. As long as that system remains, we will never know justice. The reason why the 9/11 myth exists at all is because the bankers are able to buy anything and anyone that can be bought. Through this inherently corrupt and unjust system, those with virtue and integrity are punished and ridiculed, while those motivated by greed and power are rewarded. This explains why virtually all politicians are lying criminals. They are nothing but political prostitutes. So the governments of the world are bought and paid for. Multinational corporations are likewise controlled. Education is nothing more than indoctrination. And of course, the mainstream media is nothing more than prostitutes of propaganda who are committed to keeping the people ignorant and divided. With regard to 9/11, they are providing aid and sanctuary to the mass murderers responsible for this event, which makes them, the mainstream media, criminally responsible as well. But once again, the head of the snake is the financial system, which translates to private control of the issuance of debt-based money. It is this system of power that corrupts every aspect of human society. Nonetheless, it is fragile because it inherently requires our consent. Let me repeat this. The financial system that is enslaving us requires our consent. Understanding this, we can see that we are our own prison keepers, but it does not have to be this way. We do not have to sell our children into self-imposed slavery. As for America, the insane lies and violence of my birth nation became so unbearable, I was compelled to renounce my U.S. citizenship and publicly declare that I no longer have anything to do with this madness. But I am reaching a point where, despite the shameful reality of what America is today, I see many bright lights, such as the courageous truth tellers who are standing up in greater and greater numbers day by day. 9/11 is a magnifying glass into the character of every person in a position of public trust. When so-called public servants profess their belief in the official myth that Muslims carried out this event, they reveal themselves as an untrustworthy moron at best, or more likely, prostitutes in the service of the tyrants. As uncomfortable as it may be to face up to, those who control the education, mass media, and the vast majority of governments are in fact prostitutes who have sold their soul, and identifying them as easy as looking at their stance on 9/11. And this is the great gift of 9/11. If we receive this gift, we will rid ourselves of the traitors and replace them with people of honor. Calling for a new investigation is not enough. Calling for a new investigation will likely be used as the last-ditch escape route for the traitors to produce yet another whitewash. Allowing the fox to guard the henhouse is madness. Allowing the criminals to judge who is guilty and who is not is beyond stupidity. We, the people, are the guardians of truth and justice, and we must create our own institutions or completely reform existing ones in order to effect justice. I repeat, calling for a new investigation is not nearly enough. Number one on the to-do list is ending the private control of the issuance of debt-based money. After this, ending the United Nations 5 permanent member veto system is a bare minimum for UN reform. Anything less would require an end to the UN, as the UN system has facilitated massive suffering and death. No longer shall 5 permanent members be trusted to decide the fate of nations. It is for the people of the world to decide, not 5 northern nations. I would also call on the people of the world to demand reform at the International Criminal Court, so that consent amongst nations is no longer required to punish international crimes. With that done, the key players in the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, especially George Bush and Tony Blair, must be immediately apprehended and delivered to The Hague and prosecuted for war crimes and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court. In addition, criminal charges must be brought against Israeli leaders for Operation Cast Lead, in which they mercilessly bombarded a captive population in Gaza for 21 days, a population that includes over 800,000 children. The key to improving life for the people of the Middle East is for us in the West to take responsibility for the crimes of our nations and subsequent policies that have subjected the people of the Middle East to endless suffering. 9/11 and the war on terror is only the latest example of how we are culpable in mass murder. To redeem ourselves, we must take control of our governments, and this leads me to my last suggestion. If the U.S. government refuses to invalidate every law that is injurious to the United States Constitution, then the traitors who have broken their oath to uphold the Constitution must be arrested and forcibly removed by oath-keeping patriots, at which point the U.S. Constitution shall be restored as the supreme law of the land. While the U.S. military has been used as a tool of the empire, there lies before this military the opportunity to redeem itself. If the U.S. military can find the courage and honor to do this, I will for one proudly claim my U.S. citizenship. But more importantly, the world can finally be liberated from the yoke of the empire that is America today. This is the primary duty of the citizens of my birth nation, and I believe the fate of the United States, indeed the fate of the world, will be determined by their success or failure to restore the United States Constitution. Most of all, the time has come to confront the most important truth of all. And to do this, we need only stand in front of the nearest mirror. Take a good, hard look into your eyes and ask yourself, am I a coward or am I a man? And as for the women out there, ask yourself, am I the woman that I am meant to be, the most beautiful thing that exists? Are you fulfilling your responsibility as a mother? Now make no mistake about this. It is our generation, right here, right now, that will decide the fate of our world. So when our children ask us, what role did you play? What do you suppose your answer will be? Welcome back to the show. Well, I think the content about 9/11 speaks for itself, and really what we're facing now isn't so much whether or not the official version is the truth or not, because this program and many other programs out there have made very clear it's an insult to our intelligence. And as I've said in this program, calling for a new investigation is not enough. It is time for criminal indictments of those people who clearly must have had foreknowledge. When I think of Larry Silverstein, you've got to think about this. This is a billionaire businessman. Now, come on now, a billionaire businessman. His business is making money. Now, why would a man who's got a billionaire business background buy buildings which are clearly nothing but a liability, that are full of asbestos, that would have cost billions to remove? Why would he buy those buildings? Is he emotionally attached to the real estate itself to the point that he's willing to risk large amounts of capital simply to own a building? Well, that's just quite ridiculous. And even if it were, how did he have the foreknowledge to actually double the insurance policy? And not only, I didn't even mention it in the earlier part of the program, he's already won over $5 billion in an insurance settlement, but he's going after the airline companies for, I think, an additional $11 billion. The audacity of this man to have invested a paltry amount of money into buildings which, had they not fallen to the ground, would have been a major liability and cost him ungodly amounts of money. But this is more than enough evidence just in itself, never mind the myriad of other things, if we had a real investigation that would reveal who this man is and the foreknowledge he had. But the bottom line is this: as I've said in this film already, 9/11 is a great gift. We have to make that gift actually valuable at this point, however. Now, having said that, I believe we've got Christopher Bolin on the line. I wish he was here personally, but the UK government was too afraid to have the two of us get together, I suppose. Christopher, are you on the line?
Yes, Ken, can you hear me all right?
I hear you great. It's wonderful to have you on, my brother, and I'm sorry that we haven't been able to meet in person, but I'm sure at some point it will happen. Thank you so much for coming on. Now, Christopher, you're back in Sweden. Can you just tell us a little bit about your reception here in the UK?
Yeah, sure. Great show. I really wanted to be there for the show. I think you're doing excellent work, and that's why I really wanted to come there and help you out as much as I could. But I flew into Heathrow Airport on British Airways on Saturday, and I was detained about noon when I tried to pass through customs. I was completely honest and open with them. I told them I was coming to visit with you, and that I was going to do a show interview with you and do some family research. And they held me for the whole night and let me go. They sent me home the next day.
And was it revealing in the time that you were there? Did they give any indication? I mean, we know the pretext that they used to go ahead and deport you effectively, but was there anything revealing about their behavior as to why they were doing this?
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty clear that they held me for 8 hours before they did an extensive interview with me, and then they based their decision to remove me from Britain on what I told them in the interview. So they held me for 8 hours on nothing other than the fact that I didn't have a hotel reservation, that hotel being Hotel O'Keefe. And I told them I was going to stay with Ken O'Keefe at Paddington, and I had his phone number. But that apparently was, you know, my name, your name together put off alarm bells, and they did everything to stop me from getting into England.
Well, welcome to democratic, freedom-loving UK, Christopher. You're not the only one who's been harassed in that way. In fact, your treatment was quite mild compared to so many. Nonetheless, we've got you on the line now, so let's make the most of it. Now, Christopher, I've got some bullet points here of things that we were going to discuss, and I guess the first on the list is the fact that there was no real investigation. I mean, can I ask you to please expand on this?
Well, you know, 9/11 was a monstrous crime, and it was a very complex and sophisticated crime of false flag terrorism. You know, in which it was the crime was designed to be blamed on a targeted enemy. That enemy being Osama bin Laden and the Al Qaeda. But the fact that this crime was not investigated is not well understood. First of all, there was not a proper criminal investigation. That was run by Michael Chertoff and the FBI, because Michael Chertoff was the Assistant Attorney General who was responsible for prosecuting the crimes of 9/11. And as we know, he facilitated the destruction of all the evidence. And there has been no 9/11 trial for any of the culprits or the alleged culprits, nor has there been any trial for any of the victims or the relatives of the victims.
It's quite actually amazing. I have to give the powers that be credit, because what's been created is an environment whereby you can't even mention the word Jew without automatically being attacked as being anti-Jewish, and I've reached a point, quite frankly, where I realize that we cannot solve our problems unless we use the appropriate words and stop falling into the trap of political correctness, which prevents us from using the word that is most accurate. And when we look at these players, as it's shown in this program, the main players in covering up this crime are, in fact, Jewish. Some of them are dual nationals with Israeli-American citizenship. It's becoming more and more more known to people in America that the Jewish lobby is extremely powerful. And unfortunately for the Jewish people, I see them in the same category as myself or you as an American citizen, an American-born son. I did not ask to take responsibility for the crimes of America. And I certainly don't participate in these crimes any longer, but I have to accept the fact that the birth nation to which I came from, the one that I used to pay taxes to, the one I used to live in, is committing these horrendous crimes. And I feel that it is absolutely essential as an American-born son that I do everything in my power to stop the crimes of my birth nation. Otherwise, I'm complicit, or I'm cowardly, or I'm just simply not doing what I feel is my responsibility. And I'm hoping and I'm wanting more people around the world to accept the fact that we cannot just sit by and say, well, I don't approve. We have to do more than that. And this is where I feel that the Jewish people, the good Jewish people of this world, really must stand up even more forcefully and say, listen, the actions of the Jewish state of Israel and these Zionist Jewish supremacist fanatics does not in any way represent me. But as of right now, that hasn't happened. And the fact that Michael Chertoff and Philip Zelikow happen to be Jewish and so many of these other players is a real layer of protection, because most are simply too fearful to actually talk honestly about who these people are. And in fact, that is what introduced me to your information. And I'd like to thank you for having the courage to actually speak honestly about this subject. But is it not amazing the kind of cover that it gives simply by this control of language and which words we can use?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly right. I wrote the book Solving 9/11 as my effort to use the evidence that's available from 9/11 to expose the cover-up, and it's a Zionist cover-up, as it's a Jewish cover-up, as you say, and identify the people behind the crime and the cover-up. And what I found from my research, literally from day one, was that the people who were involved in the cover-up and in the crime were invariably Jewish Zionists who were in positions of power to make decisions to have facilitated the crime of 9/11 and then in aftermath to cover it up and prevent any obstruct the justice that should have happened. So it is as Solving 9/11 shows very clearly, it was a Zionist project. It was a Zionist crime. There's no question about it.
Yes, and I brought the Palestinians into this as I could because having been to Palestine many times, I've lived there, I've met so many Palestinians, I really empathize with their situation, because what they're facing is this incredible supremacist ideology which literally treats them as if they were cattle. They don't even count, quite frankly, and the enemy they face happens to control the mainstream media. And they've used that media for decades to portray the Palestinians as these Muslim fanatics who want to drive all the Jews into the sea, and the poor Israelis, they don't have a partner in peace. And they've gotten away with this. Ever since the creation of Israel, quite frankly, they've gotten away with this because of the enormous power they have with the control of the mainstream media. And, when you think about the plight of the Palestinian people and all of the preconceptions people have about Palestinians, the vast majority of which are negative in terms of the way they've been portrayed by the mainstream, this is exactly what we're facing with 9/11. And again, I have to give some credit to the powers that be, because they've created the social construct which makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to speak honestly about these things, unless, of course, you're simply not afraid. And unless you're not afraid to be imprisoned, not afraid to be killed, not afraid of losing your job or your income and whatnot, you will not talk honestly about this subject. And this is the barrier that we need to break down, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. It's interesting, Ken. The day that I was in London, I arrived on the 11th of January, Saturday, was also the day that Ariel Sharon passed away after being in a coma for 8 years. And Ariel Sharon is the bulldozer of Palestine, but he's also the who was responsible for many massacres of Palestinians in Palestine and in Lebanon. But he is also the prime minister. He was the prime minister when 9/11 happened. And so I've written about that he is considered to be the strategic mastermind of 9/11. He was the political player who controlled the state of Israel when 9/11 was carried out. And to the degree that 9/11 was an Israeli/Zionist crime, Ariel Sharon was part of it. And his coma, I believe, he was put into a coma.
Yeah.
He was poisoned in a way and put into a coma. And that's why he was taken out. So there is this struggle between these factions, between these players at the top who are behind this monstrous crime.
I agree with you, actually. I think that Ariel Sharon was induced into a coma. I mean, certainly the man fits the model perfectly in terms of being involved in such an operation. A man that is a pure psychopath. We look back at Sabra and Shatila, you know, for people who have never looked into the massacre at Sabra and Shatila, Ariel Sharon sat over that massacre and allowed these Christian psychopaths, the phalangists in Lebanon, to go in and literally just rip people apart. We're talking men, women, and children confined and surrounded by the Israelis, no means of escape at all. And Ariel Sharon is the man who basically set that up and sat by and watched. So I certainly have no problem understanding why so many people around the world, in particular Palestinians, would have been celebrating the passing of this man. And I have to guess myself whether or not Satan would even welcome him. I mean, he's on par with Satan in terms of the acts that he committed, and it wouldn't doubt that he was actively involved in 9/11. Let's get to the next subject of 9/11, which you wanted to talk about, which was the evidence. The evidence, which, you know, let's be clear about this. Evidence of a crime is something that you cannot touch. It has to be investigated, and the removal of evidence is a crime. Can you expand on the evidence that was tampered with and worse?
Sure. The crucial evidence, for example, the steel that remained from the Twin Towers, which would have exposed the falseness of the false flag crime, this evidence was all destroyed without even being examined. And this evidence was destroyed under the authority of the Israeli-American Michael Chertoff, who was, as I said, Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice at the time. And so he is the person who oversaw the investigation that was carried out by the FBI. What the FBI did is they simply turned over the evidence, this metal, this steel, aircraft parts, etc., and they were sent to junkyards in New Jersey where they were being cut up 24/7. They were being cut up into short pieces, mixed with other scrap, and sent to China where they were melted down. So this was a complete destruction of evidence from the very beginning.
And it's, you know, how many people out there have watched, you know, CSI, Crime Scene Investigation, and other programs out there like this? Let's get this straight here. We've got the biggest crime in the history of U.S. history, one of the greatest crimes ever committed. And all of the evidence, which should have been tested forensically, has been removed. Now, that in itself is a criminal act in which the Bush administration should already have been indicted years ago, because clearly if this was an act carried out by Al-Qaeda, and it's all, as we're told, by the mainstream media and all the rest of the prostitutes who proselytize all of this stuff, then there would have been no reason to cover up anything, and we could have easily investigated all of this stuff. We could have looked at the evidence forensically, and it would have affirmed what they said. But on so many levels, it is an insult to our intelligence what they tell us, and yet they've gotten away with it. And again, I have to give some credit to the powers that be, because you know what? If they can pass this stuff off and we accept it, what's worse? Who's worse? Is it worse to be a tyrant who is actually selling this rubbish and inducing wars that are totally unnecessary, in which millions of people are either killed or maimed, or is it worse to sit there and allow these kind of manipulations to occur and do pretty much nothing? And I think that's the point we're at in human history. When we come back, I think we're near the end of this segment. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the crime of 9/11. And ultimately, we're going to get into the Muslims who've been attacked as well as a result of this manipulation. The magnitude of the suffering that has occurred for them, I don't think we can apologize enough for that. So, if you will, Christopher, just stay online and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. And welcome back to the program. Christopher, this next section of talk is actually quite a disturbing one, and it deals with those who were actually trapped in the top floors of the building. There's some very, very incredible information about what these people went through. Can you please expand on what happened on those top floors?
Sure. Well, as I said, the destruction of the evidence allowed the U.S. government and media to carry out a cover-up and promote the myth that Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda had carried out, the crime of 9/11 with the loss of 3,000 lives. And the majority of those 3,000 people that died that day died in the two towers, in the Twin Towers. And they were really, literally being cooked alive because they were trapped above the crash zones. And that is to say that when the planes crashed into the 82nd floor on the South Tower, or a little bit higher on the North Tower, the people above those zones were trapped. And those crash zones were very hot because there was thermite in those rooms. That's evidenced by the fact that in the South Tower, before it fell, molten iron was falling from the 81st floor. Now, molten iron, which is bright yellow, is about 1,200 degrees Celsius. To put that in some sort of comparison, a very, very hot sauna is 100 degrees Celsius. So that is to say that the people above that 82nd floor, which is another 30 stories were above that, they were being exposed to extremely high temperatures, which literally forced them to make a decision: do I stay here and be cooked alive, or do I jump? And, there were hundreds of people who jumped. And this is a subject that is not discussed in the mainstream media at all. But one firefighter, he put it the best. He said, I looked up and I wondered how bad it was up there that the best option that these people faced was to jump.
Yeah, I've also seen reports of the firemen, obviously still distressed to this day. And they said it was literally raining humans. Yeah. I mean, there were human bodies that were raining down for a long period before the actual disintegration of the buildings.
Ken, the thing is that the doors, the exit doors to the roof on both towers were locked. Mm-hmm. So you have to ask, Larry Silverstein and the mayor of New York, what was the evacuation plan? I sent my books now to the new mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio. And I really think that we have to open up this discussion is what are the evacuation plans for buildings like the World Trade Center?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many criminal activities on that day. It's hard to imagine how many people would be rotting in a jail cell if we actually had any form of justice in this world. And that sort of brings us to the next subject, which really, 9/11 is just the tip of the iceberg, really. I mean, it's the instigator of so much, but really there's so much else involved that even allows for something like 9/11 to occur in the first place. If you would, Christopher, expand on that a bit.
Yeah, it really is, Ken, it really is. 9/11 is the tip of the iceberg of the criminal syndicate that dominates the U.S. government, and it looks like the British government, and the U.S. media. And this is a criminal syndicate, a criminal financial syndicate that, much of it came out of Chicago, took over Hollywood, took over Las Vegas, and now controls the U.S. government. But 9/11 is the conspicuous tip of the iceberg, and the huge criminal syndicate underneath that we don't see is attached to that. And you see, when we say about 9/11 being the tip of the iceberg, we have to remember that it was the destruction of crucial evidence that was in those buildings for previous crimes, like the Enron scandal, for gold fraud scandals, for all kinds of serious crimes. This evidence was all destroyed. Much of it was actually stolen. The vault under Building 6 had been cleaned out the night before, and all the gold and all the evidence for these crimes was stolen. And then the building was destroyed. In this way, it's very similar to the Zionist destruction of the King David Hotel in 1946. It was the same sort of thing. There was evidence in there that would have put Jewish agency people in the noose. So they had to destroy the evidence, the British mandate evidence that the British authorities had, so that these Jews, these Zionists, would not be hanging from the gallows. And then of course, 9/11 was used was exploited start new crimes, to create this war on terrorism in the United States, to bring in the police state that we have in Britain and the United States today. You know, the things that I went through, this detention I went through at Heathrow Airport is really a product of the 9/11 deception. And then, of course, it was used to bring in two wars of aggression. You know, the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq are wars of aggression. And a war of aggression is the most serious and the most severe war crime possible, because it is the mother of all other war crimes.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it seems our memories are sort of short here, because the ultimate crime, as determined by the Nuremberg tribunals, was in fact the crime of aggression. It was the fact that Hitler invaded surrounding nations. Now, that's a whole other subject, but the bottom line is this: whoever instigates war, whoever actually initiates war, especially when it's done in a completely unnecessary way. It's not, you know, those that attack your nation. I'm the first one to say, you know, I've often been asked, are you a peacenik? You know, are you only for, well, no, I believe in peace, but not unless it's in the context of a just world. And if you're living in a country that is being invaded by a nation from halfway around the world based on a pack of lies, well, then you have every right to kill every single invader who's coming into your land. That's a just war. That is a just war in which you're defending yourself and your country. And I defy any honest American or British or other Europeans and Westerners, I defy any British person or any American person to say that if you were being invaded from a country halfway around the world and they were invading you based on a pack of lies, that you would sit there and be peaceful while these people came into your country and started killing your children and stealing your land and your resources. And that's exactly what we've done to other people, based on the tip of the iceberg, as you say, the lie of 9/11. And an important point for people to realize is that there's no way they could have succeeded in this 9/11 false flag unless they had an all-encompassing power grid of control. If there was a legitimate media, we would have known the truth about this event so quickly, so very quickly we would have known, even if we just had a legitimate media. But of course, we don't have a legitimate mass media. They're nothing but prostitutes. If we had a legitimate legal system, we would have had criminal indictments, we would have already had proper investigations, and we would have known the truth about 9/11. But we don't have it. Not only in America, not in Britain, not in the International Criminal Court. We do not have a legitimate legal system that would prosecute people who commit the gravest of crimes. If we had a legitimate government which actually represented the interest of the people, these people in positions of public trust are nothing but criminals, prostitutes themselves who've sold their soul to the devil. They don't represent us, and therefore we're not getting the truth from them either. Those that conducted this event had to have the support of the mainstream media, of the governments, of the legal system, and they have. And the only thing that has really shed light on this is people like us. All the people out there, the people in this film who've produced independent videos, James Corbett, Michael Rivero, Mark Dankoff, yourself, all sorts of people like this who have actually come out and said, this is how we know the truth about these events. And this is the system that we're dealing with that has an all-encompassing power grid.
That's right. That's right. You know, when I was detained in Heathrow Airport, after about 3.5 hours, a man came out from behind the glass window, the mirror window, and he said, I'm not immigration, I'm not borders, I'm from Metro Police. And he sat down, he tried to ask me a lot of questions, and I told him what I could. But I told him, you know, I'm not a subversive. You know, Ken O'Keefe is not subversive. We're not your problem. We're not insurgents. We're patriotic. We're trying to help our nations. But as you say, you know, it's they view us as dissenters in the war plan. We're dissenters in the war agenda, and people like us have become the enemy of the criminal state that runs our countries.
And that's the world we live in. It literally is upside down. You know, because of my involvement with the Palestinian cause, the Israeli Defense Forces, and it's on the internet still to this day, the Israeli Defense Forces say that I'm an operative of the Hamas terrorist organization, and that I was traveling to Gaza in 2010 to form and train a commando unit for Hamas. Now, when I travel, needless to say, this is beyond ridiculous. But when the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli government say this, when I travel to the United States, I get treated like a terror suspect. The last time I traveled to the U.S., I was called in by the FBI. Both times, the last couple of times I've been there, I've actually had like 3 hours sitting down with special agents of the FBI. The last time I went, they called me and I called them back. They left a message for me and I called them back and I said, yeah, what can I do for you? He said, well, you know, we just wanted to talk to you about, you know, your travels to the Middle East and, you know, so on and so forth. I said, what is it? The Israelis saying I'm a terrorist again. And he said, yeah, but they're also saying now that you're getting paid by Hamas. And I said, really? I said, really, how much am I getting paid? And they said, I'll always remember this. He said, $400. And I just laughed. I laughed and said, boy, I'm cheap, aren't I? You know. And
well, that's what happened to me as well. I was removed from Britain. Now the final after 10 hours of interrogation, 9 hours of interrogation, they based on my admission that I had been convicted of 2 misdemeanors in Chicago that resulted from the police attack, undercover police attack on me at my home.
Yeah.
You see, on that basis, they said you are a danger to the public good of Britain. Now the thing is that that's what they seek to do. They seek to marginalize us, to criminalize us, to smear our names, and to discredit us. And that's why we have to fight so hard to keep a high profile and to try to maintain the best image we can, because we are not criminals, but their effort is to criminalize us and to make us look like the bad guy.
Indeed they do, but you know, I had a revealing admission from the special agent of the FBI, and by the way, I've been arrested for fraud in this country, and I wear that with a badge of honor because the police who arrested me in this country are criminals themselves. And, you know, quite frankly, these things are to be expected. But the special agent of the FBI, after I laughed at the idea that I would be a terrorist for $400, was, he said to me, look, we know this is BS. And he said, we don't like the Israelis. And this was, you know, a couple of years ago. And what I took from that was that more and more American patriots, and this is the button I'm intentionally trying to push, is that you call yourself an American patriot. How is it possible to call yourself an American patriot, especially if you swore to uphold the Constitution under oath, and your president has abrogated the U.S. Constitution so grossly that he can take any citizen of the United States, put them in a jail cell indefinitely with no charges, no trial, no nothing, and let them rot away till the end of their days. All of this according to the U.S. laws because the U.S. Constitution no longer exists. How can any red-blooded American patriot sit there and look themselves in the mirror and have any respect for themselves if they don't do what needs to be done? And that's exactly where I'm coming from. I want to see my American brothers and sisters and wake up, grab a hold, if you've got a couple down there, grab a hold of them and actually do something, because it is a disgusting embarrassment and shame to those of us who actually have any kind of honor and integrity. And unfortunately, until we change this world for the better, people like us and so many others, and what we've got is easy. You know, what we've got, what we're dealing with, you know, being deported from the UK or, you know, having to deal with airport troubles, that's nothing compared to what the Muslim people of the world have been dealing with as a result of this event.
Right. But, you know, Ken, the thing is also is that, as you say, the deception of 9/11 has completely transformed the United States of America and Britain. And we as patriots cannot allow this criminal deception to completely distort our way of life and take away our freedoms and our history. Because for anybody to accept the myth about 9/11, to accept the government version of 9/11, is to be enslaved to it. It's an enslaving device. And we owe to our children the truth, and we owe our children, you know, a better world than what we have now. We are at a critical point. We have to undo this deception. And that's what my Solving 9/11 work is all about. We have to expose the deception in order to restore our sovereignty and restore our freedoms in Britain, in America, and anywhere else. You know, it's a war it's a two-edged sword. It cuts both ways. We have done terrible damage to the Muslim world, to the Arab world, and we have chopped off our tree of liberty in the United States and in Britain.
Well, this is really what it comes down to, doesn't it? I mean, I think if there's nothing that would actually motivate people to make the changes that need to be made, surely there is at least one thing, and that is, as parents, do we not care for our children? And can we seriously have any self-respect when we are not giving our children a future. I mean, you know, our forefathers actually had the foresight to create a U.S. Constitution, a Bill of Rights. I mean, these things aren't perfect, but they are so much better than what we have today. And this is what we're giving to our children. And I just find it beyond sad. I find it really, I find it borderline complicit with criminality that we don't do more. But on that note, Christopher, is there any last thing you might want to say before we let you go, and hopefully we have you in studio in the near future?
Yeah, well, I thank you for your efforts. You're doing a great job, and I know this show is a really excellent show. So I thank you for doing it, and thanks for having me on.
Christopher, my brother, it is a real honor to have you on. Thank you for all the courage that you've shown, all the truth-telling that you've been providing, and I hope to see you in the not-too-distant future. You take care, my brother.
Okay, thank you very much. Good night.
And I think it would be fitting for us to end on the note of apologizing once again. I am not Muslim, and I don't plan to be a Muslim, although I have been complimented by having been called a Muslim by people that I respect and who also follow the faith of Islam. But the Muslim people have suffered massively. And of course there are Muslim criminals, and they just didn't have anything to do with 9/11. And ultimately, the Muslim people have suffered tremendously. And this is the trap that was set for us as people, as otherwise good people of America, of the West, and whatnot, you know, that we got conned into this, and we've allowed our brothers and sisters in the Islamic part of the world to suffer badly. So on behalf of all of the Western people who know the truth about this, I want to reiterate a deep apology to you. And justice, in my opinion, will come, and hopefully soon, and you will be rectified, and the remedy will occur in challenging, in clearing your name. So ultimately, I'd like to thank everybody who helped me produce this program. Again, there was a lot of people involved making sure the facts are correct. I open that invitation to anyone of any stature within the governments of the U.S., the U.K., or Israel who want to challenge me on anything I've said. And if you don't have the courage to do that, well, it only reveals you for who you are. Thank you all very much for tuning in. We'll try and make the next show even better than this one. Rest assured, we're doing our best. Thank you very much.